Josh and Frankie.
What a couple of dumb shits.
Hello, primates! You found Primus Tracks. Congratulations! Find us on the interwebs at Instagram and Twitter at Primus Tracks. primustrackspod at gmail.com is the email address. There is a Facebook page. I think it's just called Primus Tracks. And, of course, patreon.com/Primus Tracks for all the Josh and Frankie you never, ever, ever wanted. Thanks, patrons. I don't know why you do it. And it's time to welcome in our guest today. We are talking about the Primus track, Follow the Fool. It is the second track from the Conspiranoid EP. We need help with this one. It's all over the place. And when things are all over the place, we bring in Matt Hunter. Matt, welcome back to Primus Tracks.
Always a pleasure to be here.
Hi, Matt. Thanks.
Oh my gosh,
Frankie.
I mean, I think last time you were here we talked about Extinction Burst, which is this mishmash, wonderful, chaotic piece. This track, Follow the Fool, is a little more compact, but there's some wackiness here as well. So I'm so glad you're here to lend some sanity to the proceedings. As far as Follow the Fool goes, it's our second track, of course. It's credited music and lyrics to Claypool. We're definitely going to talk about that track. Matt, thanks for being here for that. Initial thoughts, by the way, Matt, because this EP is only 7 months old. And as we talked about last episode, that's very young, of course, in a band's chronology, especially one as long-lived as Primus. So I'm curious about your initial thoughts when you first heard the EP and how they've evolved or grown or changed over the preceding 7 months.
I think it's always really fun when I remember Frankie talking about this before, when you come to be a fan of a band and you get to finally experience a new release of that the band's releasing in real time, and you get to take part in that sort of process of promotion and hype, and then the product lands and you see the reception and everything. And I've sort of been experiencing that to some extent since like Animals kind of era.
Wow.
And I think Conspiranoid looks to be kind of one of the most compact sort of releases of original material that they put out in that time. Indeed, maybe even since before that. So it's so bite-sized that it is a little, you kind of wish that there was a little more to chew
Yes.
on there. But, I mean, the title track obviously is a lot to chew on in terms of its runtime. I remember at the time, I think there was a comment in the previous episode about how initially I was a little bummed that so much of the runtime was given to the jam at the end with the sort of narration over it. Mm-hmm. And I kind of wish that there was a little more going on, or at least more of the mix devoted to it instrumentally at that time. But I've warmed slightly over time to the title track. I really like Follow the Fool, and Errant on the Side of Caution I think is so unique in their discography. There's nothing else there's not really another Primus track that sounds like it. And that's
Punchbowl kind of has that vibe, no?
Yeah, it feels like it could fit there. I'm not sure how much of that is me hearing the fretted six for the first time in decades, and it kind of like taking me back to the Brown kind of Punch Bowl era. But it is a really unique set of songs. I think each one treads some territory that is pretty unique to the EP. And I revisit mainly the more compact tracks of the last several Primus releases. I revisit them quite frequently. So Follow the Fool and Aaron, I still play on a pretty regular basis, and they haven't grown old for me, really. So I'm really excited by a lot of the material on the EP, and I'm still, as fans, we're always hoping for the next thing to come around the bend. So I hope they continue on the interesting path that they've been on for the last couple prog-tinged releases.
Yeah, none of this stuff sounds the same, and that's always a feather in their cap, and it's always great for listeners. As dedicated as we are, and of course if you're listening to this, as you are. And thanks for your dedication. Not to us, to the band. Give them all your money. Well, we have a little bit of miscellaneous debris before we get into the track itself. Couple of things. Frankie, you might remember all the way back, and Matt, you too, all the way back to our first episode in which we talked about Suck on This. I believe the year was 1996 when we first did this podcast, or at least that's what it seems like. It seems like a long time ago. But just a few years ago, Frankie, we were talking about Suck on This in our first episode, and I remember marveling at the Chicken People.
Yes, me too. I always wondered who are these chicken people on the recording.
For those of you not familiar with what we're talking about, at the very beginning of Suck on This, of course, it's a live record recorded at Berkeley Square, and Primus was well known, at least in the Bay Area at that time, for packing the house, bringing in these wild crowds. And there are these sounds, these people, as Herb's doing his cymbal intro to YYZ, or YYZ, if you're one of those of that persuasion, there's these people making these chicken sounds, or at least I call them chicken sounds. If you listen here in the first few seconds of Suck on This, you're going to hear, behind the cymbal intro that Herb's playing, you're going to hear some interesting noises. I'm going to play it again. So right behind the cymbal, listen to the chickens just going wild. So it's always been a mystery to us. Who are these chicken people? Well, it turns out, thanks to the internet and social media, we know who these people are. Now, I'm not going to name their names because I didn't ask their permission. They are pals with our pal, Frankie, Matt Weiniger. There was some discussion about Suck on This happening over there on Matt's page, and somebody posted, "Oh my gosh, I remember myself and my friend at these shows as they were recorded making jungle noises behind Herb's cymbals, and it made it onto the album." And I thought, hold on, jungle noises? These might be the chicken people. Two guys are the chicken people. I know their names. Unfortunately, one of them passed in the 90s, but one of our chicken people lives on, and I have to say, you're a legend. You know who you are. I'm going to reach out to the chicken guy, and I just need to know more, you know? I don't think he'll come on the podcast. This is going to be one of my own little self-indulgent passion things that I'm going to follow up on, and maybe I'll report back. I'm sure you guys, there are things that irrationally delight you too, and you don't have to admit to them right now, but that was one of mine. Frankie, you have some miscellaneous debris too.
That's right, Josh. We forgot to mention it in the previous episode, but it's important to point out that, as you are all aware, Primus and the Chocolate Factory with the Fungi Ensemble is being reissued as a Golden Nugget vinyl with a golden foil sleeve. If you're collecting all the variants, this would be edition number 9 of Primus and the Chocolate Factory.
Number 9?
Yes.
This includes other formats.
So
right?
we have the European lilac version, the standard chocolate brown version for the USA, the Digipack album, the surround sound with DVD version, the Best Buy version with T-shirt, the official bootleg version with the alternative cover, the golden ticket version limited to 5 copies, the mispress with the color swirl, the new version with the golden nugget version, and that's number 9, right?
Mm-hmm. That's impressive, man.
I guess we could even go to number 10 if we count the promo CD.
I don't keep track of too many reissues, but that's really impressive, Frankie, as far as all those versions of the Wonka record. So if you like the color gold, you've found the right album for you. Yeah, the color, I love the color. The brown and gold go together very nicely. Once again, give Primus all your money. It's a good decision. Speaking of giving somebody all your money, we should talk about Follow the Fool. Once again, music and lyrics by Claypool, as credited on your liner notes for Conspiranoid. Once again, I think it started with, remind me, Frankie, it started with Naugahyde, I think, where it no longer was credited to music by Primus. It's being credited to individuals working together. So this one, music and lyrics by Claypool, and this one runs a cool 3 minutes and 45 seconds, at least on my CD rip. It's compact, Matt. You don't have to talk about 11 and a half minutes of music. I'm just going to play the first part, Matt, and hopefully you can tell us what in the world is going on. And I know 2 of my least favorite words are going to come to the fore, and that's fine. But Frankie's showing respectful disagreement with his index finger raised, because that's the signal in my classroom.
Hashtag.
All right,
people.
So here's, get your team together. You guys are going to jump me in an alley sometime. Probably O'Malley's alley. All right, here's the first few seconds of Follow the Fool, and then Matt, You can help us make sense of it. A little bit of Herb there. So I'm going to pause it because that's the first 13 seconds or so. That's going to come back around over and over again throughout the tune, which is really funny to me because this track, to me, Matt, I just see a bunch of concentric circles, if that makes sense, because that little lick is pretty concentric in and of itself, but all these parts come back around. And I will tell you, when I first heard this track, and I'm curious about your guys' reactions too, I couldn't place... Les has great rhythm, so I doubt that he was off if he was playing too fast or too slow, but I think it was just the residue from the envelope filter that was throwing me off. So it wasn't just an easy 8th note or 16th note. So there's this residue, and it was throwing me off at first. And it almost sounded like it should have been 2 strikes. But it's just the single strike each time, right, Matt?
That's right, yeah. And I think it's easy to get lost the first time you hear it because there's no, like you mentioned, there's very minimal drum accompaniment in these, in the verse breaks. So when you're not familiar with the structure of the song or you're not familiar with where it's going, it's sort of like, okay, well, is this falling on 1, the upbeat, the downbeat? Like, where is my home base here? And so sometimes that can be fun because you end up hearing a riff or a rhythm in a way that it's not necessarily intended to, and that can be fun. I think a lot of prog bands play with that sometimes, where they'll just switch the beat, sort of in the middle of a riff, and like it gives the whole thing a new context. But yeah, so this is a very classic sort of, it's sort of a drone note kind of riff in the style of there's now a rich history of these riffs in the Claypool oeuvre. Really kind of starts with Iwengao.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of going, let me turn off the envelope filter, where instead of being very like kind of choked or muted as with this envelope filter riff, it's...
Never turn off the envelope filter.
I know. I've committed the cardinal sin. But you're sort of hitting the note sort of lower on the string, so I'm on the A string, and then you're hitting the octave as an open sort of drone note, in this case the G string for Iwengao.
Yeah.
And then he goes lower later, but then that comes back eventually in Boonville Stomp. Where instead the drone note is a D instead of the G string. So both of those riffs were very similar and kind of played off each other in a way, and they were, the bass Joe was Iwengao, then you move to the dobro bass for Boonville Stomp, and then basically with the Duo de Twang album, you almost have a whole album filled with a lot of these kind of drone type riffs. And even the lead single for Winona, it's very, very much kind of in the realm of Boonville Stomp pretty firmly. But then you come on to Follow the Fool, and it's the first one of any of these kind of drone riffs that I'm aware of that Claypool's done where the envelope filter plays a pretty prominent role. And so rather than letting it ring out, which can kind of, with the envelope filter, can kind of get dissonant and kind of a little smeary in a way, he kind of makes it very sort of staccato to kind of, I think, both emphasize the effect, but so that it's not... Because if you're trying to drone the string with it, it sounds a little messy and just kind of weird. But yeah, so it's in the same sort of interval as the Boonville Stomp or the Winona Duo de Twang version. We're in D. We're droning on D there.
Okay.
And he's hitting the root note kind of at the start of some of these riffs and just kind of plucking and muting with his left hand the open D string. And every once in a while he's sort of hammering this ascending note pattern sort of a half step up to the D on the low E string. And there's a lot of chromatics in this song. So a lot of the variations that you hear in the notes sort of in between, or once we get to the bridge, a lot of it is sort of, it's something that I've noticed a lot in his more recent work, specifically in a lot of the songs on this Saturating 7. When you guys, I think you guys had KO on for
The track?
The track, yeah.
Yes.
And there's a lot of that on the track where he's sort of playing these groups of 2 notes that are in hammer-ons. There's a lot of that happening in this song as well, where the main note patterns for, as you're building up to that D, he's just kind of going in groups of 2 notes in a chromatic sequence.
Yeah.
And that's really pretty much most of what he's doing in the verses. You get a little bit of variation once you move into the chorus, where he introduces a couple other notes to intersperse with those notes. He goes up to the A string, at that same 10th fret. And so... And I think a couple times in there, he's not just playing the straight notes. He's playing like some kind of a chord. Doesn't sound like a power chord. A lot of the notes in this song get a little hard to kind of nail down because the effect is so heavy. And because he's doing these groups of chromatic notes, they kind of smear together in a way. So it's hard to hear exactly where he's landing. But a couple of times in there, it sounds like he's doing either that sort of classic 2-note kind of 5th kind of power chord thing that he does on the higher strings with the flamenco strumming, or he might be doing like octaves. It's a little hard to tell, but... And it kind of just lands you right back into the verses there.
Yeah, so he's got a shape that he chose for this one, and he moves it around a little bit, but it's always coming back to that root note because we get that drone from it. Okay, and so he's striking it and muting it. So I guess it is 2 strikes each time. My ears weren't fooling me, but the mute. It's funny to say this, but the way he mutes it is so muted on the record that I don't almost hear. I think the first couple of times I almost didn't hear it.
Yeah, a lot of times too in the mastering and in the mixing process, a lot of string noise and a lot of those kind of sort of extraneous frequencies that you might always want in a mix, they get kind of filtered out or EQ'd out. So maybe more of that was coming through in more of a rawer mix of it, and it's just harder to come through in the final mix. But yeah, that mute as a percussive tool is something that's like all over slap bass and Claypool's sort of techniques in general. So yeah, that might be the element that you're not hearing there that you're kind of looking for.
Yeah, and I think it usually comes through in the mix. I don't know if the envelope filter has something to do with it or it's just the way the final mix came down. So that's a good point, and I'm glad... thank you for that, because I thought it was nuts. So I'm going to forward a little bit because I really like our chorus or pre-chorus, I suppose, with Who's the Bigger Fool? Is it the fool that follows a fool? And that part is quite circular as well. And you modeled part of it, but it's really what I really like about it is the all 3 band members get in on the cyclical or circular nature of that part. So they're building on Les's foundation there, and they're all together in lockstep, and it's monolithic and kind of a lot of fun. Let's find that part. Oh, I love how it opens up there with Herb laying down that groove and Larry giving us that really high frequency lick there. What I like about this is a couple of things. One, Herb's doing his thing where he's mostly sitting on the toms and he's closing that hi-hat. So there's a lot of space, and we know that he's not playing as big of splash and crash cymbals anymore because of the wash, and they don't want that in the mix. But it's so clean, so we're hearing those big toms. Lur's guitar sounds really big, and Matt, I know you play a lot of guitar, so I do want to hear what you have to say about Lur's guitar tone here and throughout the EP, because I think those Gibsons are nice and fat for him.
Yeah, I have to agree. It's been interesting, as you guys go through the records, to hear those things change in a pretty dramatic way, not only from what you were just talking about with Lur, but also with Herb, too. Every time his kit changes and evolves over the course of different album cycles and touring cycles, I think it really fundamentally changes the kind of dynamic of the sound and the kind of things that he plays or gravitates towards. And so it doesn't sound like his playing on like Animals, for instance, even though there's some kind of pretty space out, kind of proggy-ish kind of stuff there. It's not as thundering and kind of big and boisterous sounding. It's very tight and controlled. Whereas Lur, by comparison, who sounded a little more tight and controlled and cleaner on like a Green Naugahyde, like you said, the Gibsons, and I lost track of what kind of amps he's using currently, but whatever the sound is, it's sounding very big, even though he's playing something that's very kind of piercing and strident sounding, that's kind of jumping right out of the mix in the chorus. It still does sound pretty big and authoritative. It doesn't sound like thin or wimpy or anything like that. It really cuts through with authority, and I think his tone on the EP sounds really good overall. And it's an interesting produced EP. Like you guys were saying, every Primus record has its own sort of characteristic production and kind of identity in that way. I've struggled to find the words to describe this mix, but you can hear everything that's going on, certainly. And Lur really has a pretty authoritative place in this mix, I think, compared to some Primus albums.
To me, it's just mixed like a live performance. Mm-hmm. It really does come across that way. I think he's also playing on Marshall Stack these days.
That doesn't hurt at all.
Right, yeah. Street cred wise and sound wise, I think you're going to get a nice big fat sharp sound out of those Marshalls, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's sort of a classic Lur tone recipe. As much as his rig and equipment has changed over the years, he used Marshalls for, I think, a good chunk of time, at least through the early 90s. I forget whereabouts he changed to more of a Mesa Boogie type rig, but I think the Marshalls were somewhere in that mix for a pretty long time. And I think they suit his playing and they suit his place in Primus really well, I think.
I wanted to point out that the heavy part of Follow the Fool reminds me a lot of The Last Salmon Man, particularly live performances. Just the way that it's galloping along on the pachyderm, it's very reminiscent of Salmon Man.
Oh, I think of that bass part. Yeah, I can hear that. Matt, I'm curious what you have to say about that.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. You're referring to the solo parts you said, Frankie?
The heavy part of Follow the Fool, I think, is very reminiscent of The Last Salmon Man during the bridge, when Les was galloping on the pachyderm and Lur was playing the guitar solo. Yeah.
Yeah, when Les goes
kind
to
of
that
a similar
man,
tone, right? Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, there's definitely a galloping sort of it's definitely a gallop is a good word to describe it. And I think sometimes of some of the different kind of jammy sections, even of like An American Life, where it's like
oh sure,
where there's just kind of that pulse and that whereas Follow the Fool is it's more about that kind of quick bounce with the mute, and those songs kind of have a little bit more push and pull with some of the other things going on. But yeah, I think there are definitely parallels to be made between all those things for sure.
I'm hearing it in my head, Frankie, at least, so I agree with you.
Speaking of live performances, Josh, in the case of Follow the Fool, it has been performed 34 times so far. The live premiere was April 23rd in Madison, Wisconsin, and the last performance to date took place in Mexico City. Now, what is very peculiar about Follow the Fool is that sometimes it was inserted in the middle of the sets, but it had a tendency to be an encore.
Oh, yeah, right out of the chute, the first encore, right?
Right on.
Yeah, that's right. It did take that place. It didn't take very long for them to find that spot for it. I think it works pretty well there as the first encore when they come back out to build up to something for a closer like your Southbound Pachyderms or what have you there that are pretty regular as closers.
I don't know about Conspiranoia because I mean they could bust it out for sure. I mean nothing prevents them from doing it, but it takes up considerable space from the sets, right? However, I can see Fool sticking around in the set lists. I can see it becoming a staple. It has that potential, right? It's compact, it's punchy, it gets the crowd going, and it represents a new release. So why not?
Yeah, I can see this one sticking around. So, and if you have 34 performances out of what was it, 52, I think, on the second leg of Tribute to Kings, including South America and Mexico City, that's a good percentage. So I think it'll probably be a regular, and we said it last time. I don't know that Conspiranoia will be right in the middle of the first set every time, every show, but it made sense to promote it that way. But I think Follow the Fool might have more staying power. When we talked to Les a long time ago, he said, I really like those songs where I can dig in and it just feels good to play. This one looks like it's feels good and is just kind of a lot of fun, even though you're not doing anything too wacky.
Yeah, I think it would be one of those songs. It's not to say it's like easy to play, but it's as far as hammering away on something and not having to be uber precise, like with a Tommy the Cat or something like that, or a DMV. It's something that he can dig in and kind of hammer away at, and I think all of your points are good in that it's got that kind of energy when it builds to the chorus and in the bridge with a good guitar solo. It kind of is sort of similar to like the 7 from the previous release, or something like I had hoped to kind of see maybe even something like the Scheme carry over to future tours, where it's something it's a little more compact, more sort of consistent instrumentation, energetic, easy to kind of put in a set as a representation of newer material. I think if there's a candidate for that on the EP, I think you're right. This is probably it.
Let's take a look at some other parts of this here track. I mean, we talked about we got the verses down. We've got that pre-chorus with, is it the fool? Is it the fool that follows the fool? And that circular groove happening there. And then things open up for the main lyre line. Tim's keeping time, and I think he's keeping it on one of those really tiny toms as opposed to just regular hi-hat and snare, if I recall correctly. But then we get a shift around the middle of the tune that's really, really interesting, and I think it plays very well. I love that vocal there, too. How? I think it's after this one where we get the shift here. I think Larry just played that perfectly, just to do those whole notes, ascending like that, to transition us to another part, and what's going on underneath. I just think it's perfect. You know, I don't say that about too many of these tracks. I love all these tracks that we've talked about, but I think that's really mature songwriting, I guess. I don't know if that's the word I would use, but that's the one that springs to mind. It just seems to fit and seems to be the right thing and not the flashiest thing.
Yeah, I think Lur's the master of playing exactly what needs to fill the space, or, you know, with everything else that's going on. And often, you know, fortunately, unfortunately, what else is going on is pretty busy and pretty involved. And so sometimes the best move is to drown something in effects and just like hold a really interesting note over it or two, and then kind of climb or descend. I think what he's doing in the solo section here is really... It's just, like you said, it just really suits everything else that's going on underneath it, with less, you know, being pretty busy with the things he's doing and Tim following along too. Mm-hmm. Sounds great.
And it does kind of flip the old dynamic on its head because, of course, in your older rock and roll days, the bass player's holding down with those quarter notes and not doing anything too interesting most of the time. and the guitar player is the one that's wheedly, 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 and it's flipped on its head there, where the higher register instrument is playing those whole notes, but the bass and drums are the ones really giving it to us. I suppose a distraction of a sort, or at least a dichotomous nature, where I'm supposed to be looking at the guitar player because he's playing a lead line, but these guys are doing some really wild ass stuff. So I appreciate that. I think that's a lot of fun, and it can be a challenging listen, and I think that kind of distills Primus down for the uninitiated too. It's a challenging listen. So I really enjoy that part, and I love that little. I'm going to rewind a couple seconds because I love that little fill at the stop, and then things continue in a similar direction. So we just get that little pause. It's like, you're driving along and you go, oh, that's a nice cloud, and then you just continue barreling down the highway. So once again, kind of these half note, whole note things. I love this pattern. I love that too. So there's some is there some delay on there because or an echo, like a long loop echo there is what I'm hearing, Matt?
I think so, particularly when he does that. One of the things that is sort of a classic Claypoolism by now with the Kaler sort of tremolo bar that he has on his bass is he'll pop one of the high notes, like typically something on the high G string, and then as soon as he pops it, he will just dive the arm of the tremolo bar to drop the pitch.
Yeah.
And then kind of bring it back up in either slowly or in kind of a fluttery, warbly kind of way. And yeah, a lot of times he'll put an echo or a delay effect on so that drop in pitch kind of cascades and sounds really cool as like an echoey effect.
Yeah, it really does there. And once again, that all opens up and then it comes back to that and there's a pause. And Frankie, as you've said many times, especially lately, stop-start is the signature Primus thing. So we get it here too, some stop-start action. And it takes us right back into the verse and into that drone. But I gotta say, I gotta rewind it just a little bit so we can hear that part again, because Tim Alexander never fails to deliver. It's just a little thing there, but it's so clean and precise. It's like he never misses. If he had taken up firearms as a young man instead, he'd probably be one of the most decorated snipers of all time. Something like that, because he just so precise.
It's a very technical track, isn't it?
I think for what Tim's doing, it certainly is, and that contrasts with you talked about this being a chromatic. Not too complicated tune on the bass, but it's very Claypoolian. But Tim is doing these things that are very precise to match it, to stay in lockstep, and therein, of course, is the puzzle of Primus. How are you so technically proficient yet making these lazy sounding things, or goofy sounding things, as opposed to. Let's take it to the end, because that's when it really kicks into gear as far as the cyclical pre-chorus part, and to me it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until it finally ends. So we're talking about the last 20 seconds of the track here. I'd forgotten about that very last ow. It's the bass does it, but the Les does it on the vocals too. That meow. It's like he just ran out of gas. I'm looking forward to that live cut, Frankie. Before we started, you said he does something interesting on the vocals in the live cut, but there he's kind of leaning into a little growl. And but it's controlled. Like everything's really controlled. That one doesn't really fall apart. I'm thinking of something like Hellbound 17.5, where they have a really cool groove, but it just completely falls apart at the end and turns into a mess. But here, everything stays tight, and it comes to a really nice, clean ending. I didn't think I was going to compare those two tracks today when we pressed record, but that's the one that came into my head.
Yeah, Hamburger Train comes to mind for me. where at the end it's just sort of doing like, and it's just kind of like, or putting time's another great one. Yeah, I love the tracks that just sort of do fall off the rails at the end, like deliberately, because it's always really fun. But yeah, you mentioned earlier about how there's so much of this track where they're all sort of in lockstep with each other, which isn't actually like a super common Primus trope necessarily. Right. It's something that we've talked about with some of the album closing tracks like Extinction Burst and Chastising, but it's not something that we see actually all that much typically in Primus. So when they do it, it is really rockin' and it is really energetic. And for this track, it's actually a pretty significant chunk of the whole track. So it is a bit more rockin' maybe than Primus would typically get. Does really make for an energetic track all the way up to the very end, where Claypool Bot loses batteries and
yeah, I think they save it for the big moments, all that the unison lockstep stuff, and this one does get that big sound on that pre-chorus under the Fool That Follows the Fool. It's big. It's and it's so circular and sing-songy. Frankie, I saw you doing this with your head, and it is. It's kind of like Fool that follows the fool that follows the fool that follows the fool, you know?
And that's exactly what you see on the music video.
Oh, right, yes, yeah, that's right. A lot of the visuals, it's the head going back left to right, just nodding back and forth, because it is that sing-song. It's bordering on becoming a show tune, but it goes into the Primus direction as opposed to Guys and Dolls or something, but it's that close. Nathan, Detroit! I can't believe I just did that. Other thoughts on the music, guys? I mean, I kind of pointed to the things that stood out to me.
So I can talk briefly about some of the stuff in the bridge there, and then the kind of lick that intersperses some of the things in there. But
oh, sure.
In general, I just think it's a really cool, compact, rockin' kind of track. And speaking of the real stop-start thing, I think the first time that it was mentioned, mainly in the context, I think, of the podcast, if I'm remembering correctly, was when it came to some of those proggy anti-pop tracks, like I'm thinking Liquid Sky, I think is what I'm thinking of. But I think that there are times when it's incorporated where it feels like it's a little bit of a momentum killer, to where you feel like the song's launching and then it kind of drops out again.
Yeah.
But then there are other times where I think the thrust of what's going on when things drop out still sustains that tension and that drama. And I think that this is one of those tracks that navigates that balance really well, to where even when everything drops out, you're still kind of waiting for, the lyric that's coming up and the little punctuations that he's doing in the pre-chorus, that the timing kind of shifts here and there a little bit in the different verses, so you're not sure where it's going to land. And lots of things about that really work for me. But so I guess just real quickly, in general, everything I said about the verse riff during that bridge, it all just kind of jumps up into being in G, sort of like I showed Iwan there. And he's playing a lot, again, in this sort of chromatic. And again, it's very hard to hear exactly what notes he's playing. He's just kind of improvising, it sounds like, because no set of notes is exactly the same, but he's playing a lot in the, like... He goes all the way up here to the 15th fret and does this sort of slap pattern that I tried. One of the ways that I primarily learn a lot of this stuff is just by visually watching what he's doing. And there's really not a ton of live footage, of the recent tours showing him in close detail exactly what he's doing, but he's doing sort of this slap, pop, and hammer-on kind of pattern. So a lot of times it's very muted, so you're just getting a lot of the envelope filter sound, and then it kind of ends on this 17, 19 on the DG strings. It kind of seems to always land on there, so it's like a slap, hammer on one string, pop, hammer on the next string, pop, or slap, pop, before he does the same pattern on the next couple strings, so it kind of looks like... And then he kind of lands on this.
That big bend, yeah.
Something like that. not legally binding. And then
It sounds good enough to me, man.
then he does the.
Yeah.
For those of us who haven't drilled a big hole out of the bass yet for the Kaler tremolo, I just kind of bend the crap out of a note on the lower strings that kind of approximates that G that he's popping and diving that trem bar with.
Yeah, that's a great approximation.
What Matthew was doing in the beginning is actually a little reminiscent of Little Fishes.
I think I know the part you're talking about. Unfortunately, that's one of the songs I don't know how to play, but I love that, like, or something like that. Is that the part you're referring to?
And the part that leads up to that one. The part that leads up to that one, it's quite similar to what you were playing.
Okay, I'll have to go back and listen to that. I really like a lot of the things Les does in that song. I especially like the... I'm not sure if that's exactly where he plays it, but it's something in that kind of realm.
Yeah, you're in the neighborhood because I recognized it. So yeah, you're not too far off.
Yeah, I really like that song.
There's something you mentioned too, Matt, about, and this is something I forgot to point to in the track itself, about not exactly knowing when it's going to hit with the fool that follows the fool, or they do it kind of play it straight the first couple of times, but near the end is when we get that tease where there's a much longer pause, and then the drone note goes, and then we finally get the fool that follows the fool that follows the fool, and it's really great because it's a nice fake out, and if you're not paying attention, you might pick your head up and go, what happened? And then they hit you with it. Is it the fool? Time. Is it the fool that follows the fool? Is it the fool that follows the fool that follows the fool? Oh, the fool that follows the fool that follows the fool that follows the fool. It makes you wait so long. It's so great.
Like I said, I think it's a cousin of The Last Salmon Man, which is really cool for me because I think Primus has reached a point where if they pick a particular bass for a track, it's going to be reminiscent of other songs for us, right? Or if they go for a particular sound or a tone, and that's not a bad thing. That just means that their catalog is so particular and their songs are so unique that everything harks back, right, to the past, even if they keep moving forward. Mm-hmm. In terms of the music, I can only say that I consider this to be a very exciting track, and I really enjoyed it live.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a bouncy one live, and I love its place at the first encore. I think that's great. Let's talk about the lyrics for a little bit, and here is something I appreciate about these lyrics as opposed to the Conspiranoid lyrics, which is they're a little more innocuous. The Conspiranoid lyrics are right there in your face, and I think as we mentioned last time, as Les ran these lyrics by his son said, they're a little preachy, Dad, and so he had to couch what he was trying to say in these characters in the Conspiranoid lyrics. But here, whoever the fool is, they're not immediately identified or identifiable. And so what that means, and this is why I like that vague nature of them, is that you, the listener, you get to fill in who that is. And I have a feeling I know who it is for the composer of the lyrics, but I also know who it might be for different people out there in the world who I know. They're going to fill in a different face when they hear the lyric, look at that there fool talking lots of shine. You look at that there fool playing dirty tricks. It must be made of Teflon because nothing ever sticks. So a lot of these lyrics you can ascribe to almost anybody in the public sphere. I've seen that happen already with these lyrics, with people discussing politics and whatnot, which we don't really do here on Primus.
But these lyrics are a natural transition from Conspiranoia, right?
Oh, yeah. And that's what, Les is still, all three of these tracks, the lyrics, I think, are born of his frustration at what was transpiring in the world during 2020 and 2021. And I think it's similar to the Conspiranoia one, but I wrote down in my notebook, why did people believe this shit? And I think that's kind of what maybe Les's mindset. He said, why did he believe what these hucksters and, disinformation kings and queens are serving up? And I think that's why he's using a lot of this phraseology I really love the couplet churning bullshit into butter because butter always pays. That's a great couplet, and it's a great visual. I think it's nicely represented in the visual elements that accompany the tune. There's a couple of ones I want to point to. He must be made of Teflon because nothing ever sticks. That's an old phrase. Teflon, of course, being this coating, this chemical coating in a lot of frying pans, so you don't have to use oils and whatnot because things won't stick to it. Frankie, who is the Teflon president?
I have no clue.
Was it Vicente Fox? Am I right?
If it was a Jeopardy question, I would probably guess Reagan as well. But I'm not 100%
it
sure.
was. Yes. Yeah, it was Reagan. I got it right.
Nice.
It wasn't Vicente Fox. I'm really upset about that. I thought I had it.
Or Sathington Willoughby.
So the Teflon president, nothing would stick to Reagan when people tried to pin things on him, and it showed up in election results, for crying out loud. The other couplet dancing around the room while farting in the breeze. Friends huff it down like it's American cheese. Hey, cheese, it's back in the fold. All of these couplets, of course, are showing how the fool, whoever it might be, is doing the dumbest shit imaginable, and people are just eating it up or treating it like gospel truth. Even though this guy's pretty awful, apparently. He can't complete a sentence, can barely complete a thought. That's me tonight. A mouth so full of lies you'd think his tongue would surely rot. And by the way, I'm just reading these like straight prose, but I can still hear that rhythm over that drone note too, and I think that's what's great about the rhythm of these lyrics.
The construction of the sentence is very interesting. Look at that there, fool.
Mm-hmm.
I have never heard something like that.
And that's more of a countrified, a rural way of talking. I dip into it every once in a while because I grew up near farm country, and so I knew people that talked like that. It was different from most city folk. It's really easy for me to dip into and say, them there animals or that there barn or whatever. It's dialect, and you hear it in a lot of rural areas. So I'm glad you brought that up, Frankie. It's and I think he does use it to great effect because it fills that syllable. Look at that there fool. You need that second TH sound there. That there. It's good repetition. But I like these questions. But who's the bigger fool? Is it the fool? Is it the fool who follows the fool? Or, and this isn't printed in your lyrics book, the fool who follows the fool, who follows the fool, who follows the fool, and it's all circular. And it does beg that question, because if is it the person with the bad idea? Is it the person who believes in the person with the bad idea? This is one of those recursive type logic questions you could just chew on all night, I suppose. Probably not get anywhere, because I'm guessing that the answer is they all are. But it's also open to interpretation, depending on your own personal biases. Imagine that. So that's what I like about, like I said, I used the word innocuous earlier. You can apply this to anybody and any group of people, just about. And that's, but I think we know where the author's going. I'll leave it at that. Before we hear the live cut, Frankie, I'm curious, when you saw this track performed live in Mexico City recently, how loudly were you screaming, "Fool who follows the fool, who follows the fool, who follows the fool"?
I was trying to sing along, but it's quite hard. It's quite hard to get it right. And now that I recall my live experience, I did watch, of course, I watched the video when it was premiered, but I think I appreciated it a whole lot more by having the chance to see it on the screen in the background. And when I was looking at the characters and the way that they were drawn and animated, I just kept thinking, that's so Punch Bowl. It's so Punch Bowl, right? It was really, really fantastic to experience that.
Oh, yeah, it does remind me of that animation style to a degree. So you weren't singing it too loud, it sounds like, and you weren't getting weird looks for that.
I was kind of taken aback by them playing this track. I wasn't expecting it. I mean, when they started with Tweakers and then Winona, I thought that it was going to be a hits set list. So when they started playing this song, it was really surprising for me. And I was kind of just absorbing the whole thing.
I think that's a great way to do it. You take it in the first time, just experience it, and then you can scream along next time. And because it's a new song, people are going to look at you like, how do you know the words to this? And that always cracks me up. So let's listen to a live cut here. This is from Calgary, Alberta, June 9th, 2022, at the Grey Eagle Casino. Let's hear a really nice recording of a portion of Follow the Fool. There's that.
Last Salmon Man or what?
A little bit. Crowd likes it too. That sounds great. And then with that recording too, you really hear the kick drum patterns, that doon doon gak, doon doon gak.
Like you said, the kick drum, in as tight as it is with the hi-hat chokes and things like that, it sounds really punchy, really good. But the strangeness of that pattern almost reminds me of some of the other sort of non-traditional Herb kind of drum beats that he does that just sort of flow together, sort of like a grapevine situation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just a very kind of unconventional thing to put under what else is going on musically, but gives it a very sort of unique identity, too. Sounds killer.
It flows a lot better, I think, than standard 1, 2, 3, 4 on that.
Yeah, I think it's some of the interesting accents he's doing with the toms, especially, just kind of interspersed with the hi-hat, kick drum, snare kind of situation. Throwing in the toms where he is kind of strange, but it all flows together and sounds very natural.
Can we please hear the aggressive vocals in the coda?
This is just for you. Let's see if I can find it on the first try, because I didn't time code it. Here we go! Oh, I went too far.
A little before, yeah.
All right, rewinding. Let's hear those aggressive vocals. I love that growl. Oh, the fowl's a fool. It sounds great. I think we're... There it is. Oh, he does kind of get robotic there. That's fun. Is that what you got in Mexico City, Frankie? Something like that?
Yeah, it was similar to that, but this recording is really, I think it's the best version so far.
So Frankie's going to keep this one in rotation. He's going to ask for it at every show from his friend. What's your friend's name? Larry? Larry
yes.
L, I think? That's him. All right. And Matt, is this one you see yourself plunking on around every once in a while?
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, I think it's a little bit of a shame that we haven't had a full album of original material with Herb in quite a long time.
Yeah.
We get these little bite-sized chunks with Animals and Conspiranoid EP, and then, I don't know, I'm sorry, I lied. 7, obviously, is a full length with Herb. That's not true, but...
You could call that a bite-sized chunk. It's only 34 minutes.
It's a bite-sized full length, yeah. So, I mean, you can almost fit, all of those together on a compact disc, but for Latter Day Primus with Herb, this is one that I would throw in the mix pretty frequently, just for all the reasons I mentioned. It's not super long. It's got a lot of energy. It's got a lot of interesting ideas and dynamics in it. And it is a very, aside from the parallels that we've all drawn to Primus tracks of yore, I think it's got its own thing going on in a pretty cool way. So I dig it.
Follow the fool. Get in line. Because you've been tracked. Frankie.
With a side of caution.
Hey, Primates patrons, thank you all for tuning in at Primus Tracks on Instagram and Twitter. Don't forget, email us, primustrackspod@gmail.com. Drop us some miscellaneous debris if we missed something. You guys help make the podcast. Matt, you help make the podcast, but you also help make it great. Thank you for being here once again.
Thank you, Frankie and Josh. It's always a pleasure. I look forward to it every time. Thanks for having me.
It's always fantastic to hear you play. Thanks, Matt.
You bet, man.
Thank you.
Thanks for modeling. And thanks for getting up and down, too, man. I hope your legs and back feel okay after getting up and down to show off that bass.
My thighs are bigger than a tree trunk.
His arms, made of nickel. But definitely not a forehead made of wood. This is a smart guy you're dealing with here. All right, that's it for us, primates. Later days.
Willie Mays.